I miss this congregation. I care about each and every one of you, and I love the church at St. James. Where could I preach and have my third grade teacher in the audience? Or there's two people in the audience that I believe heard me preach my very first sermon when I was 16. Hopefully I have improved a little bit. Let me ask you a question. What do these names have in common? Job, Moses, Abraham, David, the apostles, angels, Phoebe, Nebuchadnezzar, and government. I doubt if you will get the right answer. Well, they're all humans. Well, angels are on the list. Well, they're all men. No, Phoebe was a woman. Well, all of them had to have been good. Well, no, Nebuchadnezzar was not a good guy. And many times the government wasn't very good either. There's one thing that they all have in common. In the Bible, they are said to be servants of God. Every one of them. Today, we're going to talk about being a servant or showing your service. And many times, being a servant is considered lowly, not wanted, not particularly a situation where you want to strive to be. But Jesus changed all of that. Let's look at a couple examples. You remember the servant girl in the story of Naaman? You know, if anybody could have held a grudge, it would have been her. She was a captive slave, or even being held hostage from another government, but was there to help and serve and didn't ask anything in return. She was there helping Naaman's wife. In 2 Kings, the 5th chapter, verse 2, it starts, "Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken a captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, 'If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he would cure him of his leprosy.' And Naaman went in and told his master, saying that the girl who is from the land of Israel spoke such things and such." And you know the rest of the story. Because of this little girl, Naaman was sent to a prophet of God and was cured of his leprosy eventually. Now, if anybody had a grudge, it would have been her, but she was there to serve, to help. Now, let's bring it into modern day illustration. Before COVID, we might think that servants weren't that important in the food industry. But now, after COVID, we see signs at restaurants saying, "Please be patient, we are understaffed." We see that all the time. Telling us that they are understaffed and your wait may be a little bit longer. Now, sometimes, and please do not hold this against me, I like to go to White Castles. Out of the last 3 times, 2 of those times, there was a sign on the door saying that the seating area was closed because of lack of workers. The word service is an interesting word. In the New Testament, it is used 29 times. But this is the key thing. The church has always needed people to serve. Today we think of waiting tables or working in the service industry, cleaning hotel rooms as a lowly position. But Jesus made it noble. Let's turn to Luke, the 22nd chapter, verse 24, and read one verse. And it says, And a dispute also developed among them as to which one of them was regarded as being the greatest. Now, let's set the stage here. You can just picture the disciples complaining and arguing, well, I'm more important than you, you're more, and because I know all these things. And you may think service positions as an entry level, but these positions are very important in the daily administration of lives. And so why the disciples went down that road, the answer is very, very simple. Their egos. Peter, Andrew, James, and John might have said, well, we've been with him the longest. And some may say, well, he's from Galilee. That's where I'm from. We have something in common. And two of them might say, well, you know, we're related to him. Simon the Zealot may have said, well, I'm the only one of my kind. I'm a zealot. And sure, there's some fishermen and there's a hated tax collector, but if you want something done on the shady side, I'm your man. There were all kinds of ways they might have argued, I am the greatest. I'm better than you. I'm not a servant. But it's interesting. Someone might have said, well, you know, I've done more cleaning up after the crowds than anybody else. No, nobody said that. Nobody said, well, I've taken out the trash the most. I'm the one that picked up all of those crutches after Jesus healed them. Nobody said, I got more food than anybody. Nobody said, I'm serving. I'm the greatest. No, nobody said that. And Jesus realizes he needs to teach them an example that they're never going to forget. And that's exactly what he does. So, turn to John the 13th chapter, starting in verse 5, if you would. And let me set the stage for you while you're turning there. Jesus is the Son of God. The most important person to ever walk on the face of the earth. He's the Messiah. He is the King of Kings. He's all-powerful, all-knowing, and he wanted to show what true greatness is by doing a lowly act of washing feet. The servant, the slave usually did this. And the disciples had just been arguing who is the greatest, and he probably had it. And they thought washing others' feet was, oh, that's below me. People wore sandals back in the time, and the roads were made mostly of dirt. And you can imagine how filthy, how dirty, how smelly these disciples' feet were. So starting in verse 5. When he poured water into the basin and began washing the disciples' feet and wiping them with the towel which he had tied around himself. So he came to Simon Peter, and he said to him, Lord, you are washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not realize right now, but you will understand later. Peter said to him, never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no place with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but you wash my hands and my head. And a little interjection here. Peter went between extremes many times. He would walk on water in one moment, and then the next moment he would cry out for help on the Sea of Galilee. One moment he confessed Jesus as Christ, and then a few moments later he denied times, I don't even know this guy. Peter says, you will never wash my feet, and then says, wash my whole body. That's Peter. Verse 12. Then when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, he said to them, do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are correct, for so I am. So if I, the Lord and the teacher, wash your feet, and you also ought to wash one another's feet. Wait a second. Jesus, are you telling me I need to be like a servant and wash other people's feet? That's right. Jesus is saying and showing you need to serve others. For I gave you an example so that you also would do just as I did for you. We learn from examples, not just by words. Jesus could have said, okay, disciples, you need to wash others' feet. And the disciples might have said, well, let's go on to the next thing. No. What Jesus did was interesting. He showed them washing feet. Jesus washed 24 feet. That takes a while. They would feel the water. They would feel the towel. They would remember this the rest of their lives. So Jesus is saying service is very important to one another. Luke, the 22nd chapter, verse 26. The one who is greatest among you become like the youngest, and the leader like the servant. Who is greater, the one who reclines at the table or the one who serves? It is not the one who reclines at the table. I am among you and the one who serves. The greatest is the youngest, and the leader is the servant. Just the reversal of the roles that you might really think. Mark the 10th chapter, verse 43. Whoever wants to become prominent among you, and you can just imagine the disciples in the background saying this, well, I got the biggest house. I got the nicest chariot. I have the best job. It must be me. No. The greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you shall be a slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. The Son of Man was to give his life for you. That's true service. So in Jesus' book, if you want to be great, you need to serve. That is really what Jesus is saying. 2 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, verse 7. But everything commending ourselves as the servants of God, in much endurance, in affliction, in hardship, in difficulty. No matter what the situation is, if things are going good, be a servant. If things are going bad, be a servant. And this is a side point. When we are trying to grow the church, and we need to do this, and don't get me wrong, we should not look to build just by numbers of people that sit in the pew and learn and go home. But we should look for people that say, what can I do? What can I help with you? What can I accomplish for you? What can I do for you? That is what is important in growing the church. And here, we have people who teach classes in the auditorium. You're serving. We have people that teach down in the basement. You're serving. We have people who find out who is sick. You're serving. We have people here that call people all the time. How you doing? You're serving. Somehow the building gets clean every week. Did it do it by itself? No, sir. People are working to clean it. Some people write the bulletin. You're serving. Some people in the wintertime when they shovel snow. You're serving. Someone mows the grass here. You're serving. And I suspect there are many people call each other just checking on them to see if they need anything. That is what part of being a Christian is all about. Every member of this congregation be serving, helping, doing, encouraging, calling to see how you're doing and checking on people. That's part about being a Christian. Now, let's change the story just a little bit. This is a body of people. And in my body, my mouth obviously is working. My heart is working. My lungs are working. My finger is working. My ears are working. My eyes are working. My pancreas is working overtime. So we're staying with the Reinhardts, and she kind of tells me. Every part of my body is working. If there is part of my body not working, I got a big problem. And the same principle applies to the church. If one of our members is not doing anything and just sitting on the pew, they need to be a servant. They need to start doing things. Every one of us should be thinking, how am I working and serving this church? Sometimes, and we mentioned this morning in the Bible study, sometimes people who do things publicly get all the attention. The song leader, the Bible class teacher, the preacher. But the people that serve behind the scenes are just as important than the people who do things publicly. Those are the people that make things happen. And you may not know anything about it. They're not there for the glory. What you're doing at St. James to serve the Lord, that's a question. What are you doing? Every one of us, when we go out those doors this evening, we should say to ourselves, well, this is what I'm doing. I'm calling. I'm preaching. I'm teaching a Bible class. You see, Christians are not just bystanders. Being a Christian is not a spectator sport. We must be doers. We need to be more like Jesus, serving others than spectators. So, what does the Bible say about having a heart of a servant? In Ephesians, the 6th chapter, verse 7, it says something I think is interesting. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people. So when you're calling on somebody to see if they need anything, you're serving God, not that person. And ultimately, that's the attitude we should have when we're trying to serve. Now, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite examples of a person being a servant. And it's probably not someone you would think of. This was in the back in Jesus' time. This is a lady that had a servant heart, if anybody did. But nobody knew it except Jesus. Nobody wanted to be around her. There were times in her life it was pretty bad. She was an outcast. She was looked down upon. When they saw her, they probably turned around and went the other way. Some people were probably even afraid of her. People didn't want to have anything to do with her, and she was alone. The servant heart that I'm about to tell you about is the servant heart of Mary Magdalene. She is mentioned 32 times in the New Testament. She is from the west side of the Sea of Galilee, right smack dab where Jesus taught so much. Nobody wanted to be around her. She was an outcast. She was looked down upon. You see, Mary had been healed of demon possession by Jesus. She was different. She is always listed first when in a group of women. I think that's interesting. She was devoted to Jesus. She had a servant heart. In Luke, the 8th chapter, she followed Christ throughout the land. After she got rid of the demon possession, she was always there with Jesus, it seems like. And now she is in her right mind, and she became one of the most devoted, faithful, selfless disciples, always following Jesus. And she was so deeply grateful. She left everything she had to follow Jesus. There was no question of her faithfulness. There was no question of her devotion. No question about the amazing changes in her life, minus the 7 demons. And now, 3 years later, Mary Magdalene saw the sky turn dark at the cross. She was there. She felt the earthquake beneath her feet during the time of the crucifixion. She stayed till the bitter end. How do we know this? Because she had to have been there, because she had to see where they buried him, because she went there the very next day, very early in the morning. In Luke, the 23rd chapter, verse 55, it says, "Now the women who had come with him out of Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid." Let me ask you a question. Who will go through fire with you? Mary did. Who will stick around when they may not know what to say? What could Mary Magdalene do at the foot of the cross? Just be there. And sometimes when someone's in the hospital and they're dying and you don't know what to say, or when you're at a funeral home, just being there is what you do. She was faithful to the end. At the very end, who was there at the cross? Well, we have John, we have Jesus' mother, we have Mary, the mother of James, we have a centurion, we have soldiers, we have 2 thieves, and we have Mary Magdalene. The Bible tells us that the women ran to tell the disciples that Jesus was not in the tomb, but the disciples considered their words as idle tales. So the disciples came out of their hiding just long enough to see themselves for themselves if indeed it was right. And they went to the tomb, and when they saw that he was gone from the tomb, and after seeing it empty, what did they do? They left. They just left. Everyone left except one person, Mary Magdalene. She was all alone in the midst of early daybreak, and she just sat there alone and cried and cried. Do you see her devotion? Do you see how much she wanted to help and serve Jesus? The Lord had shown her compassion. Her life had been changed forever because of Jesus. Such acceptance. He was everything to her, and now he was gone. Didn't even know where his body was. She got up to look inside the tomb one more time, tears probably streaming down her face. At the time she saw 2 angels in shining raiment. And asked her, "Why are you crying?" And she told them it was because somebody had taken away the Lord. And she turned around and she saw a man she supposed was the gardener. And for a brief moment she got her hopes up, thinking surely the gardener would know where Jesus' body was. She pleaded with that man and begged him that he would show her where Jesus was. She's crying once again, and the Lord spoke to her and said, "Mary." And she looked up instantly, probably, and saw, and she heard a voice that she recognized as Jesus. She would recognize his voice anywhere. And you know what she says? She says, "Master." We know she was about to throw her arms around him or his feet, because Jesus said, "Touch me not, for I have not yet ascended to my Father." And he instructed her to go tell the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and off she flew. Have you ever stopped to consider what the Bible says in Mark, the 16th chapter, verse 9? That when Jesus was risen from the dead, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene. And let me ask you a very important question. I said all of this in the sermon to ask you this question. Why? Why did Jesus show himself to Mary Magdalene first? You would think Jesus would want to go see his mother. Mom, I'm okay. You would think Jesus would want to see Peter. Boy, I have a lot of things to talk to you about that you need to do in the next few days. You would think Jesus would want to see John, whom he loved. But Jesus wanted to see the person who had a servant's heart and followed him even to his grave. And just being there, I believe, encouraged Jesus. Now, what can we learn from this today? 3 years ago, nobody would have anything to do with Mary Magdalene, but now Jesus elevates her to be the first person he talks with after his resurrection. That should tell you how much Jesus thinks of a servant's heart. Jesus wants us to serve one another. We're going to have a funeral tomorrow. We need to be there to encourage him and the family. When someone else is hurting, we need to call them. Show up with food. We need to serve one another like we've never served before. You see, we're Christians. We're different from the world. And I believe God expects us to help one another, to serve one another. And so we should all have a servant's heart. I want to close the lesson with a true story. It's about a girl. My dad has bees. Today I went to his house and he showed me all the honey he had gotten from the hives. He took the lid off of a 5-gallon bucket full of honey, and on top of the honey there were 3 little bees struggling. They were covered in sticky honey and they were drowning. I asked him if he could help them survive, and he said he was sure they wouldn't survive. They're just casualties of honey collection, I suppose. I asked him again if we could at least get them out and kill them quickly. After all, he was the one who taught me to put a suffering animal, bug, out of its misery. He finally conceded and stooped down, scooped out the bees out of the bucket, and he put them in an empty yogurt container and put the plastic container outside. And because he had been disrupting the hives earlier, there were bees flying everywhere. And he put the 3 little bees in the container on a bench and left them to their own fate. My dad called me out a little while later to show me what was happening. These 3 little bees were surrounded by all their sisters. Apparently all bees are female. And they were cleaning the sticky, nearly dead bees up one side and down the other, helping them to get out of the honey off their bodies. We came back a short time later, and there was only 1 little bee left in the container. And she was still being tended to by her sisters. When it was time for me to leave, we checked one last time, and sure enough, all the 3 bees had been cleaned off enough to fly away, and the container was empty. 3 little bees lived because they were surrounded by family and friends who would not give up on them. Family and friends refused to let them drown and their own stickiness, and resolved to help them until the last bee could be set free. And we can learn a lesson from that, ladies and gentlemen. Never, never give up on family. Never give up on friends that are struggling. You surround them and you help them. You show them that you care. You show them that you love them. To help them bring back to God. To help them out of the pit of despair. To help them out of the valley. And guide them to that mountaintop. We are Christians and we are here to help one another. Plain and simple. You have paid such good attention this evening. I appreciate that. That is the highest compliment you could ever give me. Thank you so much. But don't thank me. Thank our Creator that He designed the church. He gave His Son for a sacrifice for us so we might live forever in heaven. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited about that. If we can help you in any way, shape, or form to make your life right with God, there's no better time than the present. Please stand and come forward if you need help as we stand and sing.